The Nintendo shareholder meeting was interesting because it confirmed a lot of things that I've been saying for a long time in regards to like the stock prices, in regards to like Nintendo's business as a whole. They are doing extraordinarily well. But one of the copes that has surfaced over the past year is this idea that Nintendo is failing because the stock price is going down. And people have been trying to spin that as being like because shareholders aren't happy with what Nintendo is doing, and that people are that they're upset at them, and that they're gonna like try and like pull out and try to exert control over the company. This is all coming from people who are not shareholders, who do not invest and don't know how any of this works and what's actually going on. Unlike them, I actually do invest in Nintendo. I do have an understanding of what's going on. And it's time to like kind of break this down for those of you who aren't aware of what is actually happening with this company. So we saw today that Nintendo is giving a 10% raise to everybody in the company. They have confirmed that they are increasing the salaries of everyone by like 10% because the Switch 2 was such a huge success, and they want to like maintain their talent, and they want to keep them want these people to keep doing what they're doing. So they essentially did the opposite of what Epic, of what Rockstar, what every other AAA studio is doing, where they lay people off to cut costs. Laying people off is a bad thing for the business because you're not creating talent, you're not improving your product, you're just basically exploiting people, essentially. And Nintendo is not doing that. But the thing about that is that the people who really struggle in these situations, in a company that actually values their employees, that actually gives them raises, that actually, looks out for the customers, keeps prices low, the people that suffer from that are the shareholders. Because the shareholders are just parasites that are there, that are to make demands of the company, who want like short-term gains. They want to ruin the company and then like pull out and invest in the next company. Okay, they're not really interested in the long-term health and viability of Nintendo's business. Like what most shareholders are interested in is just making money with no effort, essentially. They don't care about the actual business. They don't care about the products. They just want an easy paycheck, essentially. And then when things start looking a little bit bad, they'll pull out and they'll move on to the next company like Locus. Okay, this strat would work for like 90% of companies, 95%, but not Nintendo, because Nintendo seems to have taken it upon themselves to be like the best run company in the world. I know it's commonly understood that Nintendo is like one of the best places to work for in Japan, but I do think at this point that like they really should be considered like this amazing company to work for in general. Like not just because of the raises or the work culture or the products they make, but simply on the virtue of just how willing the executives are to stand by their employees. The most famous example is, of course, like during the 1 year that they lost money on the Wii U, Satoru Iwata came out and was just like, myself, I, and everyone on the board are going to take a massive pay cut to prevent having to lay anyone off. Okay. And I think over the past couple of years, there's been like some attempts to damage control this, to try and make it seem as if like Japanese labor laws would prevent Nintendo from like laying people off, when we've seen plenty of other layoffs from other Japanese companies, and it's not like they only have employees in Japan anyway. But like the entire the reality of the situation is that Iwata and his board did something that no American company would ever do, in that they took a pay cut because of how they were having short-term problems with their new console and with their business. Okay, the executives took responsibility for their fiscal hit and took it upon themselves to take a hit to their own gains, their own finances, in order to like maintain their business and think about long-term success. Okay, because they didn't lay anybody off, The people, the developers were able to focus on creating product. They were able to hit it out of the park with the Switch, with Breath of the Wild, with all the games that have come out since. And Nintendo's now in a very good position because of Iwata making decisions like that. Now, that isn't an isolated incident because Iwata, throughout his entire tenure, would go to extreme lengths to make sure that the employees were happy and that they had everything they needed to be successful in their work. And I remember reading his book, and he would go into detail on how back when he was running HAL Labs, back when they had 60 employees, he took it upon himself to take time every year to speak to everyone in the company and get a handle on their concerns, what they were going through, their mindset, their relationship with the work culture. And HAL today is a major Nintendo partner. And to me, I think that speaks volumes as to what kind of business leader he was and just why he was so successful at making Nintendo such a huge success during his tenure at Nintendo. It's because of that kind of mindset, that kind of philosophy, and that kind of work culture he cultivated. Instead of caving into shareholder demands, for example, back in the day, they were really pushing for them to go into mobile and to abandon consoles entirely. Iwata was able to he had a very clear vision for the company, for the brand, and it eventually paid off. He understood exactly what he needed to do to make Nintendo successful. And it's very, very telling that the Wii, the DS, the Switch, those went on to be some of Nintendo's most profitable eras ever. And in fact, the Switch 2 is, even though Iwata did not directly work on it and was not involved in its production, it's very much rooted in the Switch 1, which was something that Iwata was invested in. So even today, Iwata's shadow can be felt around the company and in their behavior. In a lot of ways, I'm sure Shintaro Furukawa always thinks about what Iwata would have done in certain situations. Again, it's very interesting to kind of see this play out. But what's also interesting is seeing just how desperate people are in trying to make this look like a bad thing for Nintendo. Because I know Nintendine just made a video about the declining Nintendo stock price, and he's just skirting around the actual issue in that Nintendo does not pay out that high of dividends. Okay, they're not that high of an earner. They don't pay out to shareholders that much. They're not taking shareholders' considerations into account. They're not really controlled by the shareholders. And I think this is something that people really, really need to understand is that this is actually a good thing. Nintendo has absolute control over their company. They have a lot of great leadership. They have the best developers in the world. They're completely free to do whatever they want. And what we're seeing is a company that is not only producing the best hardware, the best games, it also has the best work culture and is actively giving people raises when the rest of the industry is just endlessly laying people off. Okay. Again, this is just the reality of what we've been seeing out of this situation. And it's something that we really do have to address. The reason why shareholders are unhappy with Nintendo is because they are unable to exploit labor the way they're used to doing with other companies. And that is something that we really do have to address and consider going forward, is that because Nintendo does not exploit their workers or exploit their IP or go for short-term gains, of course investors are going to be upset because all they care about at the end of the day is that the line always goes up. They don't really care about the realities of business or the reality of what they do. The simple fact of the matter is, their expectations are unreasonable, and Nintendo is very right to ignore them and just do as they have been doing.